founder's mind is what you see.
Welcome to this episode of the Founder's Mind Tangent. On today's episode, we continue the conversation with Kara. We explore how to contribute at every level of your organization, even when you're a recent graduate. This is a long one, but be sure to listen all the way through as Kara continues to share lots of wisdom she's picked up along the way.
It's interesting. We have one satellite office where, this is just a great example where we have some, young, junior, great, go-getter, new college graduates that are working for us in one of our satellite offices. And so I've got them working on this new project for college. We're trying to figure out exactly how Hint can get into more of the college market, and what better people to work on this than people who just graduated from college, right?
For sure.
But what I'm seeing is that, as you start to organize exactly what it looks like something as simple as a summary of what went right, what went wrong. It's your natural tendency is sort of to say here's everything that I did and why I'm really awesome, right? Because you're trying to show your company how great you are, right? But the reality is really, really good managers will actually say okay, here's what went right. And more importantly, here's what we could have done better.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what were the learnings. And that is something that's very, very difficult for junior people to kind of do. And it's an interesting thing because it's no one ever taught them in school.
Yeah.
That's what they need to own. And actually it's something that I think really great companies value. The underlinings of that is if you can actually identify how you as an individual, but more importantly, you as a company can actually be better.
Uh-huh.
It worked fine, but maybe we shouldn't have brought as much of our carbonated product with us because more people were interested in the still product because it was 110 degrees in Arizona or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to actually identify versus saying okay, we distributed 2,500 bottles. We did this, we did this, we did this. Okay, well, I get what you did, but how do we actually, what was the purpose? What was so that when somebody a year from now goes back and looks at the archive, they can actually say, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, we should definitely do this. So it sounds like that part was a total waste, whatever. And so anyway, but the point is that I've also said, to this group that I'm the other thing is that if you're working in a satellite office and, it might not be a weekly call with a boss, it might actually be you just need to over communicate and you need to sort of figure out, you may set in your calendar, every Thursday, mm-hmm. I'm going to sit there and just write Kara a quick note, say, hey, listen, just want to give you a quick update on sort of what I'm thinking about. And if you have any questions, of course, call. Otherwise, I hope all's great. Mm-hmm. Right? Just something as simple as that, managers will appreciate that. Right. So, but it's also this other mindset of sort of younger people, who are, just starting out where they're don't bother the bosses. Right. Do you know what I mean? It's a interesting thing.
My experience was, and I still see this today, is that we're conditioned in traditional learning environments to develop a perspective and an expertise in a way that makes people uncomfortable when they graduate and they go into the professional world. And the reality is you're almost starting from the beginning again when you're told the whole time that you'll be out there in the world and you'll use your expertise. There's this interesting narrative that's created in school that, to your point, puts people on a bit of a contradictory path, right? You founded a company 13 years ago-ish, right? And you've been in the startup space and building an organization, and just scrolling through all the articles that you've written on LinkedIn and all the wisdom that you've shared, there is this, it's an entire journey. You are on a journey, and this is not your first career.
Yeah. No, totally. Absolutely. And, and I think it's just, if you view it as learnings along the way too, and also different, I mean, you touched on this too a little bit. It really is, the culture too. I mean, I think if you walk into a place that is, I don't know, a large public company and, maybe your job is to kind of sit there and not have a voice at the table. I think, people here, if you don't actually speak up and you actually I think there's this, attitude, and it's not just mine, but it's like other people in the organization that have worked here for a while, that they'll see you as possibly listening, but not contributing. And then if you're not a contributor, you're not valued. And who teaches that kind of stuff, right? It's this balance. It's this balance that people need to really understand between, contributing and not be too much of a know-it-all, I guess, and I think that sort of stuff is just something that is it's just complicated to sort of teach it, but it's something that, I see and I try, and as little time as I actually have to do it, I feel like it's something I just not part of my job necessarily, but part of coaching the youngins along the way. That it's just it's something that you just have to be able to sort of, say your value without actually shouting it from the rooftops, I guess is the best way to say it. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, listen, the reason why I love where this conversation started and where it is right now is because this is the work that I immerse myself in on a regular basis, is coaching startup executives and entrepreneurs. And I am very much in the middle of the millennial bracket. And I look at my peers and I see a lot of the things that you're talking about. And I definitely embody some of the things that you're talking about at different times in my life. But some of the programs that I'm developing is around this idea of a rising leader and manager, and, developing certain skills, the ones that you've mentioned. How do you engage in a conversation as an early employee? How do you provide feedback? How do you receive feedback? How do you have meaningful conversations when you were never trained or taught or educated on how to have meaningful conversations, which are actually the really valuable ones at work, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's such an important piece that I find, especially when I'm speaking on college campuses. I always tell people there's no substitution for people who are actually willing to sort of view their role in a company at any level as really wanting to make things better and really trying. Right. And you can do that in a lot of different ways by, I always tell new graduates, and particularly ones that aren't working for me, although I've said this to people who are working for me too, but new graduates jumping in, it's so easy to stand out in a crowd if you actually show up early and stay a half an hour later than your boss.
Yeah.
Right? Your boss will actually, it sounds really, really silly, but that kind of time, I mean, what's a half an hour longer in a day typically going to be to you? Nothing. I mean, you're young and going out and having fun anyway. So what if you end up, staying a half an hour later? But it's instead the flip side of that is that you get known for being a 9-to-5er, which is the last thing that somebody wants working for them as a manager. Right. Well, and so anyway.
Well, I went through your LinkedIn, which you've done a lot of writing. And one of the headlines is why you need to work hard to get lucky. And I think this kind of cuts to the core of if I'm just taking that headline, right? And it's this idea of showing up, being present and showing up. And to your point, the bar is kind of low. I don't want to diminish people that put in their time and work hard. I'm not saying that at all, but the bar is actually low. On average, most people don't do the work, and most people don't show up. And what I find fascinating from high performers, and this is probably a good thing that keeps them motivated, is that they believe everyone sees what they see. they're like, obviously I'm going to do this. And most people don't.
Yeah. And I think it's just, I mean, it's amazing how, you know, you can do these little things. Like I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, not to say that, you know, my daughter does everything right, of course, but of course she does. Right. But, you know, but it was interesting. She had a summer internship last year in another city. And it was a friend of mine's company who, you know, maybe she did it a little bit as a favor to me to sort of hire her. My daughter's a big writer. She's still in high school, whatever. So she hires her as an intern. And so my daughter gets to this office and she was like, you know, Mom, I was like, how's the internship going? And she was like, well, I'm a little upset because first of all, they actually sat me in a desk across the room. So all the college interns are in like one area. And then I'm the high school intern and I'm in like another area. Mm-hmm. And I feel really awkward saying anything, but, you know, I'm sort of like, I'm feeling like it's like noticeable that I'm in high school and they're in college or whatever. And I said, okay, well, maybe they didn't have enough spaces for desks, whatever. I was like, but at the end of the day, is that really that important for you to do your job? And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay, whatever. You're in an internship for the summer, move on, just walk around the office, like do whatever you do. So then the next day she's like, well, you know, I asked them, you know, when am I actually going to get to write an article? Because I'm, you know, it's a content company. And she's like, when am I, you know, going to get to write an article? And they're like, well, you got to like walk before you could run and you're just an intern and, you know, and whatever. And I was like, well, you know, Caitlin, I have people who come work for Hint who are like, you know, really, I actually have to go to Whole Foods and bring cases of Hint out of the back room. Like, and I'm like, yeah, I still do that. Like as a CEO, like it's just, it's like kind of like what I do. And so I kind of get what she was saying. And so then what I realized like a week later and sort of talking to her, and again, like, you know, this went on, she was like sort of getting her feet wet and sort of recognizing this whole thing. I said, you know, what's interesting, what you're sort of describing is that you've actually in some ways been able to identify like what is a satellite office, right? Where, you know, it's not necessarily the same kind of office. The company was based here in San Francisco and she was doing a job in New York. I said, so it's sort of the setup is a little bit different. It's not sort of what you thought, but it's like, maybe that's going to actually help you to interpret what it's going to be like when you actually go out and get a job, like what it's going to be like to work in a satellite office versus like a, you know, home office. And that is something that I wouldn't have been able to identify at age 16 or 17. Totally. Like, it's like, you know, so you're learning that. And then the other thing is that you're learning is this whole thought of having, you know, people of one age in one section of the office and people of another age in another section of the office, if that indeed was something that they intended to do, which I doubt, but let's say that they did, like, you won't do it. You'll never do it again. You'll tell that story to your interns that are working for you, like later on in life, as something like was like really awkward and here's why or whatever. Like, I doubt you'll actually do that again. And then the other thing is like, you know, if your goal is really to write, like maybe you should actually just like get to know the people that ultimately would give you that assignment and stop asking them. But then maybe towards the end of the summer, just say, hey, listen, I'm not expecting you to publish something, but is there any way you could give me a couple of topics of things that like you've always wanted to see written, but you just like haven't really seen it? And see if I can just take a stab at it. And again, like, I don't think you can do that at the beginning of the relationship, but once you start to get to know somebody and you feel like you've got some kind of like, there's some kind of trust there, maybe you can just like position it. And so it was fascinating to me because she then set a goal where she was going to start to get to know her manager a little bit better. She came in a little bit earlier than her manager. She's, you know, people are very predictable. They come in, you know, you can start to figure out like if people are like coming in at 9:30, or they come in, at 7 and then they leave it, whatever. Like, and so she figured out that her boss typically came in around 8:30. So she was always there by 8. And so, and then, she was always there a little bit later. Her boss left at 6. So my daughter would leave around 6:30. And so this person started to realize that my daughter was really putting in the effort.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was, partly the time thing, but also she really wanted to be there. She was soaking it up for the summer. She wasn't sitting there looking at the clock for 5 o'clock and only coming in at 8:30 when her boss was coming in, whatever. So her boss had this perception that she just said, look, this person's really putting in effort. So, maybe I'll put in effort too. So what she noticed was her boss started saying, hey, do you want to go grab lunch? And so she's like, sure. Her boss and I said, always offer to pay, don't expect her to pay. And of course she never would take any money from her or whatever. But I said, it's just this is a job, really treat it like that. And so then by the end of the summer, she was very nervous to say this, but she did. She voiced her opinion about or voiced her question about, can I actually, are there some articles that you'd like to see written? I don't expect you to publish them. And she said, well, let me think about it. And then the next day she came back and she gave her a couple of assignments, and all 3 of them were published by the end of the summer. Yeah. And so she now has she reached her goal because she got the respect of her manager, right? And her manager, now I'm sure she's got a great reference, if she needs it. And she also got things published, which is really what she wanted to see accomplished. And so, and she was also asked if she wanted to come back the next summer. She decided she really wanted to try something totally different. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I think it's this did not start out. My point is, this did not start out as the perfect internship. It was weathered with, lots of different, possible, oh God, it's not really what I thought. How do I get this accomplished? Whatever, they're not treating me right, whatever. And at the end of the day, she thought, I'm not going to let that wall be built up, even though I, see problems with it. Instead, I'm going to figure out what are my goals and really try and achieve those goals and figure out how to do that. And she did it. And I just think it's something that, can be learned at sort of all levels in an organization too, where if you really want to, if you really want to get what you want out of something, then you also need to really show you care and work to try and show that you're a contributor and that you're passionate about, about the company and sort of where you are today, and you're choosing to be and to do something great for that company, all these kind of things. But anyway, so that's my speech on being an employee or an intern or whatever.
Amazing. Hopefully everyone listens and takes it to heart. But one of the things that came to my mind while you were talking is this, and there's a lot of research on this, but growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And I'm always bad with attributing names, but it's a well-written subject. And a woman wrote, I forget her name, but she wrote a book on this, and I'll have to add it in, at least in the outro or something. But you can look at a situation and feel that it's fixed and accept that and live that way. Or you can look at a situation and say, you can change it and start to play with that. And it's a series of experiments like your daughter went through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think it can happen at every level. It's if you have this idea that this is the way it should be, or I shouldn't be treated that way or whatever, versus saying, okay, this is, exactly this is why I'm here today and what I want to, get out of this. I think it's it's just a totally different way of thinking about things. I mean, I just think, this whole idea of growth mindset really goes back to, my belief that we're on a journey, right? And so I think that, if it's one thing to say that, I mean, the number of people that I know that actually like do what they started out thinking that they were going to be doing is very low. And the ones that ultimately like start out as being one thing and continue on, I mean, not only is it continue on to sort of do that sort of role or stay in that industry or however you want to look at it, once like the number of people is very, very small, but also like those don't tend to be the happiest people that I know.
Yeah.
Right. And the most fulfilled. Like they're really like they sort of label kind of what they're doing as like, you know, they make a great paycheck or, you know, they've got sort of some other reason versus actually people who are totally fulfilled in what they're doing because, you know, they're constantly changing with what their own passions are or, you know, interests or, you know, needs that they felt like they could actually, you know, service in some way. So I really think that that's an important piece as well.
You shared that anecdote about the FDA and the scent at Circular Summit, the, you know, Alice's conference in DC. And that blew my mind. And when I told people, you know, I'm talking to Kara, she's the founder of Hint. Are you familiar? No. We talk about the water. And then I'd say, there's also the sunscreen and the approval process to the FDA got tied up because they hadn't seen an ingredient like this, or they hadn't dealt with a natural scent before. And this is recent history. I was fascinated by that. Can you share a little bit about being connected to the problem? Being one of my guests, Janice Omedeki, said, you know, being married to the problem and sort of what that has done for your ability to build Hint. I mean, it's been around for 13 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, when I look at Hint, I think it's, well, it's, you know, may seem like, oh, wow, you've, you know, done something really unique. While I have done something really unique in beverages, when you look at some great brands and great founders that are out there, I think that I go back to, you know, that if you really, really look at sort of how they started this, it was really solving a problem. And it could have been it could be for, you know, somebody that they're living with, or it could be for themselves, like in case of, you know, Hint. But I feel like if you have the ability to sort of understand like why this product is actually solving the problem for you, and you can actually talk to that, then I think that the consumer just really understands it more. And I think it's a huge competitive advantage, especially if you're in a category that might have either a lot of players or players with a lot more money than you. I mean, in the case of, you know, Hint, I mean, we go up against huge dollars in the soda industry and the sugar industry. And, you know, nobody really, most people, I should say, knows where, you know, Coke started. And frankly, I mean, if you do know that Coke started as a pharmaceutical company, you know, it's not sort of a good storyline, right? What it was ultimately being used for. So it's not something that they would necessarily market as, you know, something that they're really proud of, right? I mean,
I use Coke sometimes to clear my tub drain, and it works really well.
Yeah, I'm
not joking.
And and so that's the thing. It's like it didn't start by, you know, like somebody trying to come up with an alternative to something else to make them healthier. It actually started, you know, as really kind of a, you know, not so positive thing, right? And so I feel like, and I don't mean to like pick on Coke or Pepsi on this podcast at all. I just mean it as like today. I mean, you look at Sarah Blakely and Spanx. I mean, when she started, she basically looked at, you know, the pantyhose market, and for whatever reason, didn't find that there was like the right thing for her. And she had a choice. She could call up like, you know, Legs or whoever is like the big pantyhose people and say like, this is the product I want. I mean, what are the chances of somebody actually listening to that call? Right? Like,
yeah, at that stage.
At that stage, like it's just an idea. And so she decided like she wanted to go do something, and then she executed on this. I mean, I've also, you know, I'm a big believer too that, you know, ideas are a dime a dozen. If you don't have the ability to actually go and develop a prototype and actually like get it off the market, then like that's 90% of the way, right? Like it's like when I hear people are like, oh, I have this big idea and I'm not gonna do it until I like actually raise money, and I'm like, good luck. I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
If you can go raise money on an idea, that's amazing. And certainly there's probably a couple of companies.
Maybe in the 90s, but not in 2018.
Maybe. No, I mean, I think you need to like actually, you know, go and prototype it out and maybe even like show that there's a market for it, whether it's a physical good or a service or whatever. Like you've got to actually like, sure, there might be a few companies out there that have done it and go become unicorns. I can't actually figure those out right now, but I feel like you need to like, that is really like what people need to do. And, you know, it's not just about having a great idea. It's actually, you know, about executing on that idea and knowing how to actually dot the I's and cross the T's. And it's not to say, you know, that you won't be changing the ink color along the way, or you won't be tying bows around it and actually making it better and better and better. But it's like you actually start to figure out exactly what it could do. And then, I mean, you look at something like sheetrock today, like I'm sure when sheetrock was starting, it's like, you know,
sheetrock, like the building material.
Yeah. Like I'm sure like that was just like somebody coming up with some crazy idea to fill in a hole. I don't even know. I'm just like making this up, but it's like they actually figured out like, okay, well, you can actually make sheetrock by actually putting this together, and then you can fill in this hole on a wall, and then they probably showed a neighbor, and then the neighbor started. And that's, I mean, I'm completely making this up, but the point is that they actually showed that there's an application and there's an audience for this product. Well, and they didn't just walk around and say, oh, it'd be great to have something fill in a hole. Like no one would do that. And it's no different today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Founder's Mind Tangent. Listen in next week to hear from Jess Christian, founder and CEO of HypeSole. Jess dove headfirst into the athletic wear world and is developing a cleat guard. Tune in to hear Jess's story and what she's learned along the way. To make sure you don't miss any awesome wisdom from guests and stay up to date on the most recent episodes of the show, be sure to visit thefoundersmind.com. You can also follow along on social at thefoundersmind. Last but not least, a thank you to Roy Matz for the music on this show and his dope editing skills that make The Founder's Mind possible. Until next time, take care.
In the world, going through all of this insanity, and try to bring new ideas, make them a reality. Illuminate in the thoughts, make it a priority to implement what you learn. What you get is what you be. In a world full of noise, hard to find that clarity to try to lead subtly, never full of vanity, and try to change something small or try to change humanity. Power forward through the dark, founder's mind is what you see.